And hello everyone, welcome back to another Love2D tutorial. So in this tutorial we'll be implementing new levels as well as making the player invincible. Now after this tutorial the game is going to be a little bit broken, but we will be fixing that in upcoming tutorials, so don't worry too much about that. Now to give an example of what we'll be working with, what we'll have by the end of the day, I just move this here. Now when we start a new game, you'll notice the player blinks, and if I try and go into this asteroid here, nothing happens. That is because of our new invincibility we added. So when we start a new game, or when the player dies, then they finally become invincible and they cannot be hurt for another while. And this is very useful because let's say you have 20 asteroids on the screen. It can be very difficult to avoid them immediately once you respawn. So if you're invincible for a few seconds, not only does that give you some time to clean up the screen, it also makes sure that you just don't immediately die once you respawn. Now to make sure that this works, if we crash in here, we'll actually explode. Then now we can try and crash into things again, and we won't. As for new levels, we can just shoot these asteroids, and I'll show you all the new levels. And one more here, right here. There we go. So now we have level 2, and there are now 2 asteroids. On level 3, there will be 3 asteroids, level 4, 4 asteroids, and so on. But it becomes more challenging because each asteroid explodes into multiple more asteroids. So it will become more challenging depending on how everything goes. Now a bug you might encounter here is, let's say you die at level 2 here. So just give me a second. There we go. If I crash against something, it tells me it's game over. But once this game over screen leaves and we want to start a new game, then you'll notice we're kind of still in the middle of a game, but not the same game. It's kind of weird. Now this is normal. We are going to fix this. In fact, if you want to, you can try and fix this yourself before the next tutorial. But it's just normal because we're going to play around with some of the code and it's going to cause this to happen. Okay, so let's try and implement that. Let's go to our state and open up our game state. And let's see here. Where are we now? We are now at draw. Okay. Then here in start new game, we're going to add a few new things. So at the top, we want to go if player.lives, so the player lives is less or equal to 0. Then you want to change the game state to ended. So this will kind of fix a few bugs, but it will also make sure we don't just start a new game, because every time we level up, we basically start a new game. So if their lives is 0 or less, that means the game has been or should be ended. So let's go here and we say self : and then change game state to ended. Else, if that's not the case, if they still have lives left, then their game state should be set to running. This means it won't be going to the menu state, for example, or to the paused state. It will go right to the running state. And now we can remove this one right here because we don't need that anymore. Then we want to say how many asteroids we want to spawn. So we can say local num asteroids, and that can be equal to 0. And here we have our asteroids. And now let's say they do level up. We want to display the level on the screen, even if it's level 1. If we run this, new game, it says level 1. So even if it's level 1, we want to display this on the screen. So we can then say self.screenText is equal to text. And in here, we can just pass in all our required parameters. So first the level we are in, level. That should be a level with a space, and then concatenate that by adding these 2 dots and saying self.level. So getting the current level. We'll say 0 love.graphics self.getHeight, and we just times that by 0.25. So it won't be quite in the center of the screen, it will be a little bit above the center of the screen. And we can just add a comma there. We can then say h1 for the text size, true, true, love.graphics.getWidth, and then finally we want to position it into the center of the window. Okay, so currently we also have another problem we have to look out for. Every time we start a new level, there's a small possibility that once we start the level, the asteroid might appear on the player. So we don't want the asteroids to spawn on top of the player. We want the asteroids to spawn anywhere around the player. So to get this, we want to create an infinite loop. And this infinite loop will basically determine when and where everything should be spawned. So let's go create a for loop first. And you can say for I becomes 1. And until I is num asteroids, so the number of asteroids, plus self.level. Then we want to go local, and in the asteroid X, so these we have here, and we want to say local ASY for asteroid Y. I do believe since we're not really putting anything next to them, we could possibly just go like this, and this should be fine. But just for convenience sake, I'm going to do this. And then at the end of this for loop, we want to insert into the table, just like we usually do. However, this time we won't need to specify a specific size. We can specify the asteroid size, because then we have our specific asteroid size we want to spawn. We can then remove this, and in between this local and this table insert, we want to create an infinite loop that will reposition the X and the Y until it is no longer on the player. So we can say repeat until, and we want to repeat it until the calculate distance from player X and player Y, and we want to say the asteroid X and the asteroid Y, and if that is more than the asteroid size times 2 plus the player radius. So we're checking if the distance between the player and the asteroid is more than the asteroid size times 2 plus the player radius. So it means if the asteroid can currently damage the player was not invincible. Then you want to regenerate this ASX and ASY. So let's just put that here, and let's just put that in there as well. So it will run at least one time, and then you will try and figure out if it should run again. And it will continuously rerun this code until the asteroid is no longer on the player. So if the asteroid is no longer on top of the player. Now this isn't really required, but I do want to just go on top here and say require globals, because we are now using a function that's inside of globals, but it's not really required. Okay, cool. So it's not really a guarantee we're going to see this change, because we haven't really seen it in the past. So it's not really guaranteed we'll even see it now. But if we run our code, it should work and nothing should be broken. Let's go like this, say start new game. Okay, and as you can see, everything still seems to work. But now, the difference is the asteroid will always spawn a relatively far distance from the player, so that they have like a little circle they at least have to themselves. Okay, I also see here we only have 1 life left, but that was for development. We can remove that later, it's not really required now. Next up, we can open up the player so we can add the invincibility to the player. So we're going to know how long the player can actually be invincible depending on how many times it has blinked. And this will also indicate that the player is currently invincible. If I were to just show the example again, you'll notice the player blinks. And at least to me as a gamer, it says, hey, this player is currently invincible. Nothing can really touch it. And once the blinking stops, you're also no longer invincible. So here you can say how many times you want it to blink. So local usable blinks. And this will be the amount of blinks you wanted. In my case, I only wanted to blink 10 times. But then times 2. We're adding 2 to it because of how fast the blinking is compared to how long the player is going to be invincible. Okay, so let's go down a bit. Then let's go right above the lasers. And we can say invincible is equal to true. So this is if the player is currently invincible, if we cannot touch the player. Let's make that invincible, not invincible. And here we can say invincible seen, and then we can make that true as well. This is if the player is currently grayed out or not. So you'll notice we go from white to grayed out, from white to grayed out. This will say if the player is currently grayed out. And here we can say time blinked, and we can make that equal to the current usable blinks. So this is the amount of times the player can blink while immortal. Cool. Now let's actually implement the design for all of this. So let's go to draw flame thrust, and let's see here. Right above everything we can create an if statement, and we can call it self.invincible scene. So if we currently are in the invincible scene state, then we want to say table dot insert into color 0.5, and that's being passed in right here, so the color, and we're just basically setting it to 0.5, which is half its opacity. We can close this function again, and we can go to draw, and this is where most of the things are going to happen. Let's go here into the else, or not the else, but the if statement here. And right underneath debugging, we can implement if the player is currently invincible and what should happen. So if self.invincible scene, then we want to say love.graphics.setColor 111, and then faded and opacity, or 0.5. So this will basically give us our default faded / opacity we want, or it will just default to 0.5. Cool. And in here we can just say else, and we can copy this line, paste it here, and we can just move this line up. We don't need to copy or paste any lines. And then we'll have this instead. Next up, we can close this function and go down to maybe the move player right here. We then want to take in dt, and this is the time between the last frame and this frame, for anyone who may have forgotten. This will allow us to calculate when the player should blink. We can then say if self.invincible, then we create an end here, self.timeBlinked. Make that equal to self.timeBlinked plus, actually minus, dt times 2. So this will first take the dt, times it by 2, and then take what we have, our current time blinked, and subtract it from there. We can then go on every uneven blink and make the player fully visible. So on every uneven one, for 1, 3, 5, the player will be fully visible and not grayed out. To do that, we can say if math.seal, pass in self.timeBlinked, and then modulo it by 2. And this is an easy way to see if something is an even or odd value. So in this case, if something is an even value, it will be true here, because 2 modulo 2 is 0, 4 modulo 2 is 0, 3 modulo 2 would be 1, because there's 1 left. We can then just say self.invincible invisible scene, make that equal to false. Otherwise, we can say self.invisible scene and make that to true. Then we can set if the player is invincible and make it false if the time blinked has ended. So if self.time blinked is less or equal to 0, so if the time blinked has ended and there's no longer any reason to blink, you can just say self.invincible and make that false. Otherwise, if the player currently isn't invincible, we can just set self.timeblinked equal to usable blinks. So we're basically resetting it. And then self.invincible scene becomes false. That's about that for the player. And I don't believe it will be working just yet. So if we run it, the player will most likely not be blinking. Yes, because we even haven't passed in DT yet. Okay, to pass in DT, we can go to the main.lua file. And right here where it says move player, we just pass in DT, which is provided to us by Love2D. And then in here, where we say if not player.exploding, we also want to now go and not player.invincible. Because if the player is not invincible, we are allowed to calculate the distance and make sure that the player is or is not exploding. But if the player is invincible, we don't want to do that. Cool. And let's see here. Right before this else if, we can go if the number of asteroids is equal to 0. So if there are no more asteroids left, we can increase the game level. So game.level is game.level plus 1, so it's going to increase by 1. And then game start new game. And we can pass in the player, and that will basically generate us not only a new player, but a new game for the new level. Great, now we save this file and we run it. Say start new game. Now the player will blink if we try and hit something. We can go straight for it and you'll see the level fade in and out. Now when we destroy this asteroid, it should increase the level because there will be no more asteroids left on the screen. Can go here and just... There we go. So now it's level 2 and the asteroids also spawned very far away from us. So there's no chance that once we go up a level, an asteroid will spawn directly onto us. Cool. Now let me just increase my life here so we can make sure if the player does end life, we can respawn without a problem. Let's go here and wrong one. Start new game. Okay, we can go through this asteroid. We can shoot up this asteroid and go to the next level. Let's try and go to level 3 just to make sure that all leveling systems work. Thanks to how we built the game, implementing levels is fairly simple. It's auto-generated, so come on, you can do it. Come on, there we go. Yeah, so now there's level 3. If I hit something, okay, then my hitboxes aren't the best. Okay, now we're invincible again, and we can fly right through stuff without getting destroyed. Until we are no longer invincible, where we'll explode if we try and touch something. Cool. And that's the gist of it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all again in the next Love2D tutorial.